What's up, guys? Steven Spikes here at the Spike Signal, and today I'm going over the big motherfucker, man. It's 2 weeks by All That Remains. Going to be talking about the music theory behind the song and how such an interesting yet catchy blend of riffs comes from the writing within the song. That's coming up right now here on the Spike Signal. All right, so let's just go ahead and jump right into it, man. So a couple things just to talk about before really getting into the meat of it. This song is in C sharp standard, so everything that we're going to be talking about will be within that tuning. Therefore, as you might expect, this song is within the key of C sharp minor. So everything you're going to see here, everything we're going to talk about here will all be from that vantage point. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at how things are. And we're going to go ahead and start by simply playing via Guitar Pro the first riff. Okay, so a couple things to get into right off the bat. Now, the very first thing to note is that I have sort of written down what I feel to be the sort of implied chords going on within each measure, and sometimes there are multiple implied chords happening within each measure, and I've just noted those things down so we can go ahead and kind of have a starting point for what we talk about here and what we go ahead and look at. So if we look at the very, very first measure, I feel that with this song being in the key of C sharp minor, that we start on the 1, and that's C sharp minor, going to the B to the A. So for those first 3 measures, essentially moving from the C sharp minor, the 1, to the B, the flat 7, to the A, to the flat 6. Now, I have derived those combinations of movements and everything from basically kind of trying to look at what the bass is doing. Primarily, I feel the bass is a really important place to start when it comes to any of this. So the bass is sort of, for this interpretation, I know there are different ways to do it, the bass is sort of like my root note in nearly all, if not all, cases. So I'm looking at the bass note here, and I'm seeing that, and let me go ahead and zoom in on this thing so we can see it really easily. I'm looking at that, and that first note there is a C, then goes to a B, then goes to an A. So you kind of see what's driving it here. Now, the interesting thing, I think, here is what the rhythm guitars are doing, and we'll see this at all points throughout the song. Ollie, rip Ollie, man. Ollie is just so skillful at being able to create something that's simultaneously very interesting and very complex in a certain fashion, but also extremely cohesive. Like we've talked about in some of the other videos, the blending of cohesive and intricate is a very important thing and a very present thing in lots of melodic death metal or in metalcore, and like an intense metalcore song like this. Very important aspect, and it's done masterfully here. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. So we go from the C to the B to the A, right? So looking at what's happening here, now I'm seeing that the B right here is being played by the bass. I then am looking up here to see what the rhythm guitar is doing. Now, here's the cool thing. So what Ollie's doing here is essentially, and right now we're just talking about the rhythm guitar, just this section right here. We're not even getting into the sort of like main riff up here yet, only discussing this portion right here. What's happening here is that a B is being played by the bass. I'm going to interpret this whole section as a B because if you can look right here, a B is being played up top on the chord here as well. That's a B. There's also, though, this D right here, which is the third of a B chord. And I'm viewing sort of what's happening here as a sort of inversion. We have the 3 on the bottom, the 1 up top on the guitar, then we have the 1, the B, down here. So all that to say, very quick, it's a single chord strum, but all that to kind of encapsulate a lot of what's going on here. A lot of chords in this song are going to be implied in interesting ways across the entire length of both guitars, or more than 2 guitars at some points, as well as the bass itself. So I'm spending a lot of time just on this little section as kind of an intro to what we're going to be seeing. We're going to be seeing a lot of this sort of the bass acting as the root note with the guitars up top, one guitar in this case up top, sort of in an inverted fashion, adding on to that root note to form the chord. So that's what we're going to be seeing a lot of here. Let me go ahead and keep on going to the next section. We then move for the next measure into an A. I'll play it again really quick. Right there. So again, we see the same sort of thing now. So we have the A right here. Then we have, and let me go ahead and zoom in on this. We have the A right here. We then have an E and an E there as well, which is the 5 of A. And of course, the root note of the bass is also an A. So just within even the first, this is a nice sort of like, kind of intro to what the song is going to be about. Within the first 3 measures of the song, we see very clearly the kind of approach that's being taken here. We have this sort of holistic approach to imply chords in very interesting ways. And what you get here is a tone and a voicing, really is what it would be called. Voicings that are very unique throughout the whole song and really just give the song a feel of its own. And I really like it. This song, and I feel this whole album, Overcome in general, does a really good job of creating a unique sound. And I feel, although I haven't like analyzed any other songs from this album yet, I feel that movements like this are probably some main reasons why it has such a unique sound. So good stuff right there. Let's go ahead and get up to the sort of, I guess we call it lead guitar, the second rhythm guitar doing the main riff right here. Okay, so play that again real quick. Okay, so gonna try to unpack things like a little bit slowly here. We have a C sharp minor implied here. Not gonna like be getting super nitty gritty into some of the later coming notes after the sort of palm muted pedal tones here. But one thing to just note is that in this case for the C sharp minor, we have a C sharp minor played an octave higher than the lowest note on the guitar along it as well for cohesion. We then have a B right here being implied, and in fact, a B note right here going as well. Once again, following along the implied chord forms, following along with what the bass is playing is another way you could look at it. We then actually go back to the C sharp minor right here, even though the overall implied chord is an A. And again, what that's doing is just creating a little bit of interest. We're following the bass line exactly on the starting notes on these 2 notes right here for the first 2 measures. But when you get here, right here, this section, I'm going to go ahead and play it. The note played here in this sort of like main riff section is a third to what the bass is doing. And that's really good. And I found this like all kind of throughout the song, playing a third over top, like as sort of your main like line and your main riff over top of an implied note of an implied chord really gives a lot of kind of drama and intensity to things, makes things sound just a little bit more exciting and a little bit more intense, especially after having these notes right here, this C sharp and this B following along perfectly to the bass line. So just kind of adds a little bit of intrigue and a little bit of excitement. Let's keep going on. Let's get to measure 4. So right here, sometimes it gets a little bit sort of, or actually a lot of bit up to interpretation with these things. I have interpreted this section in measure 4 as all of these different chords right here, simply because the bass is moving kind of quickly in quarter notes here. I wanted to be able to show this for you guys to see what's happening here. Not going to talk about it too much because I don't feel that this maybe is the best interpretation. There's lots of different ways to look at it, so whatever there. One thing I did want to point out, however, though, is that at this point, the chords that were adding the percussive elements to the song are now playing in harmony to the main riff. We have this riff being harmonized with that riff right here. These notes are being played below these ones right here, and it's a little bit interesting. You can see the extensions that are happening here compared to the chord that I am interpreting to be implied. For example, B right here has for these notes right here, for this E and for this D, an extension of 4 and 3 respectively. You can also see pretty clearly that the notes being played right here, these two notes right here, this G and this A, are third note harmonies. And in fact, I think all of these are third note harmonies. Yep, they are. So basically just adding a third underneath what's being played up top. And in some cases, even we can see right here to here, adding a fourth harmony. So we're going to see that a lot too, you know, in lots of songs, the lead sort of like line harmonized up to the main riff will be just in thirds, but all that remains is all sorts of different things here to make the song interesting, to make the song inciting, and to give the song movement outside of just sticking to that. Like even right here, you can see this, and this is all assuming this tab is correct, of course, and everything. I mean, there could always be errors. You can see this note right here. This is a fifth away from this D. So once again, we have a little bit of interesting things going on to keep things fascinating and to keep things cool. So let's go ahead. Let's listen to the whole next bit as everything kind of cuts out except for the guitar and part of the drums. And we'll go ahead and take it back from there. Okay, so fairly straightforward for this section. Let's go ahead and start by taking a look at what the bass is doing here. So now the bass for this section, when everything cuts out except for the guitar on one side of your head, nothing is really happening with the bass. So we'll just go ahead and look at the guitars. I'm going to interpret this whole section as a C sharp minor because you have a lot of C sharps right here. Those sevens, those are the C sharps, and a lot of pedal tones, a lot of zeros, those are also C sharps, of course. So C sharp minor right here. Then right here. So again, a couple different ways to look at that. You know, we have these G's right here actually played in the bass. I'd probably interpret based off of that this section, quickly just jumping to a G sharp minor. That's the 5 in the key of C sharp minor. And right here you can see the extensions that are played up over top of that. And you once again have third harmonies being played. You have this E, you have this D, you have this C, you have this B. You have the third of those being played up top here. Wanted to just take a quick second to talk about the sort of writing and production decision of doing something like this, of cutting everything else out. I feel that when it comes to building intensity, anticipation for a song, the intro to this song, and I'm including the whole like part we just listened to and defining that as the intro, the absolute ideal way to build intensity. You have an absolutely killer, very fast, very quick riff being played, while at the same time cutting everything else except a drum and a kick, I believe, is also going at the same time. On this tab, there's not even any kick and everything. It's just the snare. You have that going with a really cool riff on one side, and you want the rest of the song to come in and hit you. You want to get smacked by the full intensity, and you do. And that's one of such of the important things of being able to write music with like an ebb and a flow. If you're getting hit full force all the time, that can be cool, and there are some songs that do that, but more often than not, it's the juxtaposition between killer intensity or kind of more subdued. And I mean, this riff is still fast, like no matter what kind of style it's being played in. But when you cut everything else out, when you cut the bass out, when you cut the kick drums out and everything, it feels more laid back. It feels more pulled back before getting absolutely punched and slammed with all the intensity of the rest of the song. That's a great writing decision. It's a great way to make any song more intense and more interesting and catch the ear of the listener more. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go back and play it right from the start of all this, and we'll just check it out and get to the next section. Okay, so now this next section, we're going to spend quite a bit of time here. 2 weeks doesn't have like a ton of different riffs, but it does have a lot of intricacy within the riffs that it does have. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time on each riff. So first, I want to go over this kind of in a macro fashion. So let's talk about what chords I think are being implied and why they're being implied. And you know what I'm going to do here in order to make this a little more clear? I'm going to make the bass a lot easier to see. The bass is right here. Then it repeats all, like, keep going. Okay, so in macro fashion, I am going to classify the stuff in the verse to be a C sharp minor on account of the bass. Once again, we can see the C sharp right here. Moving then to a B, classifying based off of the B in the bass right here. To the A, classified with the A right here. To the C sharp, an octave lower this time, classified by this C sharp or these C sharps right here. Moving quickly to an F sharp minor, to a G sharp minor, based off of these notes here, respectively. Okay, so now let's zero in a little bit and talk about what's going on underneath the sort of macro layer. So this part right here, you know, it's all C minor. I feel that's fairly straightforward, and I'm going to go ahead and bring back some of the guitars right here so we can see the harmony. Let me see, that one doesn't have anything yet. We're just going to go ahead and look at these. So what we have right here is guitar, guitar, and bass. So let's go ahead and start understanding what's going on here. So again, looking at this section as C minor. So let's get into that. We have the guitars right here jumping from the B to pretty much the C sharp the entire time. C sharp, pretty straightforward for that. Now, where things get interesting and cool, we then have this right here, this note, jumping to the 5 of C sharp. So what you're doing here, essentially, is you're outlining a C chord. You have the lowest notes of the C chord, the root, played right here by the bass. You then have a 5 of that chord being played by the guitar right here. And then you have the root an octave higher, the 1 an octave higher, being played up here. So across 3 guitars, including the bass as a guitar, you essentially have a chord. You have a power chord formed out of things. And it's cool because, you know, when you're listening to the song, the bass will be coming down the center at you, and it's a little harder to hear this if you're listening on headphones, but if you have any kind of like monitoring system or just like 2 speakers, the bass will be coming at the center at you, but what you hear out of both sides are basically this sort of inverted power chord. So again, even though it's technically implying something that we hear all the time, a power chord, a 1-5, you don't hear it that way in terms of the production, and you definitely don't hear it that way in terms of the fact that the bass is so tonally different compared to the 2 guitars. So you get just a really cool and unique sound, and it's awesome that such an intricate and unique thing was put in here for what is essentially all that remains is radio-friendly song of this album, of Overcome. And even though the song is like radio-friendly or whatever, and I actually heard it on the radio, like on my local radio, you know, years ago, kind of around the time it came out, this song is anything but simple or typical of what you'd hear on the radio. So really good stuff. Let's go ahead and keep going. Okay, so now we then move to an implied B chord. Now that's the flat 7 in the key of C sharp minor. So once again, I'm interpreting this. We have a lot of Bs right here, going to interpret this section as a B chord based off of that. Now up top here, then, we jump from the C to the D right here, which is the 3 of B. So I'm saying that these sections, these notes right here, all of these little Ds up here, I'm going to go ahead and classify those as being the 3rd in the key, or not the key, in the chord of B. Then we look down here and we see, well, what do we have here? You know, we jump up from the 2 back down here, right there. And what we're getting is those Fs right in that section right there. And F is the 5 of B, A, B, C, D, E, F. That's the 5, and that actually would be an F sharp right here. Sorry about that. And what that's doing is, once again, you have the root here, you have the 3rd being played up top, and you have the 5 being played right there in that section. So again, out of that, you get some really cool stuff. You essentially have, again, a layering of chords, and the way that they're being layered is indicative of a specific chord based off of the notes, even though they're all kind of mixed up and they're all done in an interesting and unique fashion. And when you hear it, you know, it sounds normal enough because it is implying like a normal sort of chord, like a triad, but it's done in such a unique fashion. So, and again, I'm spending so much time with this just because I feel, and I know other bands do stuff like this, but I don't see it happen like on the regular. So I feel like this is kind of pretty cool, pretty important stuff to sort of get into and be talking about. So let's go ahead and move to the next one. And I'm going to actually just start the verse from the beginning so we can kind of hear everything transition into the next implied chord. Okay. So we're going to jump back to that A. Now I feel that things are implying an A, and that's the flat 6 in the key of C sharp minor. We're going to look on down here to the bass, and we see the bass is playing A's the entire time here. Now the thing is to figure out what's going on up top with the guitar. So A is our root. Now we have the pedal tones, once again, as always, and it's worth noting because the pedal tones are all C sharp, you probably could get away just fine with looking at this entire section as C sharp if you wanted to, even though the bass isn't playing and sticking strictly to C sharps. So getting back on with this section, we can see that the implied chord here is an A. That's the flat 6. We're assuming this because the B is playing A's. And if we look here at this guitar, right in this section, we can see that now things are getting a little bit more kind of straightforward. They're actually playing the A. So I think this is a little more demonstrable that, in fact, it is pretty clearly an implication of A. We see an A here. Pretty much all of these notes, all these threes are A's. And then if we look up here, what do we have? We have a lot of E's, which is the 5th of the A chord. So once again, we have a situation where we're basically implying a power chord. And in this case, the way it's working is the bass is the 1. That's the very, very bottom. That's the root and everything. This guitar right here is playing an octave higher than that. And this guitar right here is playing the 5th of that. So basically you have literally a power chord, and then you have the bass underneath that root of that power chord. This is a very kind of typical chord that you would hear in most songs, except again, it's stretched out across 3 guitars, counting the bass as a guitar. So let's go ahead and just pull it back up and listen to the whole thing again and get to the next section. Okay, so taking just a quick look at kind of the transition, the da-da-da-da part, we see that in this measure, I'm interpreting what's going on here as an F sharp minor, as seen by the bass right here. Those are F sharps, as well as a G sharp minor based on these G sharps here as well. So, and again, kind of saying that, kind of drawing that conclusion, just once again, based off of what we see here. This right here would be a 5 of the F. This right here would be, you know, the 2. So it's a little bit kind of not perfectly on point with it. But once again, we have the bass going on. Then we have some harmonized notes here. And once again, these notes now are actually being perfect fourths right here. The note here, that C, and the note right here, that G, playing in conjunction, a perfect fourth harmony. And these notes right here, starting on this G, and let me go ahead and zoom in there, starting on that G, are being played to, are basically thirds on top of these notes down here, starting on the E. Not going to get into every single note. You can see the stuff right there if you're kind of interested in specifically what's going on. This part right here is a little more straightforward. It's just based on thirds. So the next section is actually a repeat. I'm just going to go ahead and play it all the way through to get to the next part. Okay, so we have essentially the same thing going on here with, of course, some variation being the main name of the game. So now the bass is changing up here. So our interpretations of the chords, the way I interpreted things, are going to change as well. So if we get real close to the bass, we can see that we have C sharps going on here for the first 2 measures. So we're going to interpret this whole section as C sharp minor. So this makes sense as well. We have C sharps shown here. And we basically have percussive lines playing here that very clearly point to C sharp as well. That's your C sharp, that's your 5, C sharp, whoops, right there, right there. So, okay, now here's where things get kind of interesting. I've seen a couple times over the course of doing these videos that when a band wants to utilize the 2 of a minor scale, that the 2 typically has a flat 3 and a flat 5 accompanied to it. Now, the issue with playing a flat 5, and I mean, obviously it all depends on what you're going for. The issue with playing a flat 5 is that it can be very, very kind of dissonant sounding, very, very harsh. It has a lot of bite to it, not necessarily in a way that you want to use liberally if you're trying to make a more melodic song. But what happens when you want access to that 2 all the same? Well, what bands will do is they'll sometimes play the perfect 4th of that chord right there, or they'll play the flat 6, and that's what's going on here. So we can see that there is a D sharp applied right here. I'm interpreting this section as D sharp from here to here on account of the fact of the bass. That right there is a D sharp. So if we look at the rhythm guitar, I'll just call this section the rhythm guitar, it's the chords, we have palm muted 2s and 5s, basically palm muted D sharps, and the flat 6 of that D sharp. It's that B right there. Again, there you could look at this as like an inverted third and try to draw some other things. I'm saying that all that remains is simply just using an extended chord. They're creating an extended chord. This is essentially a D sharp flat 6 chord in order to create the sort of tone and the feel of this section. And along with that, you also have the D here as well. So very, very clear implications that it's a D sharp using a flat 6 extension. And it's pretty cool stuff, you know, used like as in a fundamental fashion like this is, in a rather demonstrable fashion, I'd say like this is, it's pretty cool. It really kind of, once again, just adds to why this song and this album, I feel the whole album, but especially this song overall, have such an interesting and unique characteristic. It's because of stuff like this. I mean, this is a fundamental part of the song. It repeats like, what, 3 times, at least 2 times. It repeats a lot, and it's things like this that give it that sound. So let's go ahead and keep going on. Okay. We now get to what I would view as an E, and that is the flat 3. That's the major note, the parallel major, or the relative major, my bad. And once again, we're going to look down here, and what we have right here is an E. Let's write here our E notes. And we can look at these things right here as well as an E implication. So now they're doing something different. They're actually playing perfect 4ths. So now what we have is basically E with a 4th extension on it, or an 11th, whatever you want to call it, depending on how far away it is from the root. And that creates an interesting tone as well with what's going on here. And you can further, this whole thing is further supported by the fact that the sort of main riff guitar, shall we call it, are playing E on the melody notes as well. So just basically we went from a D sharp with a flat 6 extension to an E implication with a perfect 4th extension. So again, really, really cool stuff right here. Very, very interesting, unique choices. Let's go ahead and keep going on. Okay. So this part right here kind of, it returns to where we were at before. We have C sharps here, we have C sharps here, and these are all C sharps right here. So this just kind of goes back to C sharp pretty kind of demonstrably. And then let's go on to the very last measure. And you know what? I'm going to play this whole thing from the start with what we've talked about being kept in mind to get to the very last measure. Okay, so then the very last measure, now we're going to call this a G sharp minor. That's the 5 in this scale. And I'm viewing actually this only being part of the measure because the bass is actually jumping to a G sharp for this section. So essentially, just calling it a G bass off of the fact we have the bass line right here. We also have in this part right here, we have the little lick right there starts on a G as well. And underneath that, like under that, we actually have some thirds down. So these are essentially, if we're viewing it that way, this note would be kind of an inverted 6, an inverted flat 6 of G sharp minor. So that's kind of like a confusing, complicated way to look at it. you can basically just view what's happening here as this being the root, this G sharp being the root, this G sharp right here kind of starting the lick aligned with what the bass is doing, and this just kind of being a sort of extension underneath just to add a little more texture and character to the song. But there's a lot of ways you can look at it. Those are just a couple ways. So I'm going to play the whole thing through again, and we'll move on to the big badass chorus, man. Repeats. This chorus gives my brain so much fucking dopamine. It's crazy, man. Holy shit. So, getting into it, let's go ahead and just play the first section of the chorus. Okay, let's start with those first 4 measures right here. So, there's a ton of different ways to look at this. I'm just gonna kind of show you everything that I think makes sense. So, we're gonna be looking at the bass, start off everything once again. I'm going to be viewing this measure right here as a C sharp minor, bass is C sharp minor. We have a C sharp right here. And now the lead guitar line, the do-do-do-do-do, that whole part, the palm muted part, follows perfectly with C sharp minor. We have the ones, right, let me zoom into this. We have ones shown right here from C sharp minor, the chord, some 5s, some 1s again, and some 3s. I didn't notate every single note there, but hopefully you can see the pattern of what I'm getting at right here. Moving on then to the B, the flat 7. All right, so we have a B right here. A B note is being played right here. That's the bass. And then kind of a similar thing. Now, not completely, but once again, we have some similar stuff going on. We have the 3s of the implied chord of the B of the flat 7. We then have some Bs being played right here. We go outside of the chord tone a little bit to grab some 2s right here, the Cs, then we go back to the Bs. So, you know, kind of, and this is kind of what you'll be seeing throughout the entire thing. We have an A, the bass implies the A right here, and then we have some 3s from the A chord, which function as Cs essentially here. We have some more Cs, then we have some 7s of the A chord. So once again, stepping outside of the main triad a little bit, but not too much. For the sake of time, I'm going to move some of this through this stuff a little bit quickly unless anything different goes on. Let's see what the next thing is. So now the A is held right here. So now we actually can see that there is a little bit of more movement outside of the chord tones. We have some 2s here. Essentially what's happening here is, you know, they're not sticking with the exact chord tones of every single, like, chord movement, but they are sticking very close to it. They're only grabbing notes outside of the chords in order to give a little bit of texture and movement very sparingly. And why is that? Again, it's all just to stay consistent, to keep things very unified. When you have a production this dense, and like we haven't even accounted for vocals. Like at this point, vocals are going on. They're not in this tab, unfortunately, but they're here. And the layers of vocals and all the different other little tricks and things that are put in here. It's a very dense mix. It's a very dense arrangement. You got to keep things really, really within itself and packed together in terms of harmony if you want to put all that stuff in there. And this just does it spectacularly. So very, very good deal here. Let's go ahead and move on to the next part. Repeats. Absolutely beautiful. Fucking love this chorus, man. Holy shit. So let's go ahead. Let's get back to the new part. Just totally lost myself. Where are we? Here we go. Okay, so now we have some different movements going on here. Let's make sure we can see everything that is relevant. So we have a new guitar added here. Now, in the actual mix, it's a little bit hard to tell. I'm pretty sure that the palm muted parts are still going on even throughout this next section we're going to talk about. I think they're just turned down a lot to make room for the part right here. For those higher notes and everything. So let's go ahead and get talking about that stuff. real quick. Now, what we're going to see here is, if we look at it, we see basically just some held notes going on here. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see a little more of everything. Now, when we look at this, we're going to jump back. We have some octave chords. So now the rhythmic lines change a little bit too, and the voicings change as well. So let's go ahead and get into that just for these 3 measures or so. Now, in this new bit, we have a C minor, and that should be a C sharp minor, actually. That's misput there. We then have a B, so it's a B/F sharp. All that means is that an F sharp is in the root position. So basically, you bar 2 strings on your guitar, then you basically make the power chord based off of the low, like the higher string, the physically lower string that you're barring and everything. And that's what you have here. So we can see this right here. We've seen this chord a lot of different times in different places, but that's just a little bit of a different voicing. It's inverted essentially. We then go to a E inversion, or I'm sorry, it's actually an A with the E in the root. So again, just a different voicing in the rhythm to make things a little bit more interesting, a little bit more catchy to your ear and stuff like that. Now we have the same kind of lines continuing here. Okay. Also want to note that perfect 4th chord right there. Again, just a little bit of a flare, something to just catch your ear off guard somewhat, and it's pretty cool. Now let's go ahead and take a look. Now with this section, we want to look at the octave chords. Okay, that's kind of a new thing that's added here, if you would. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring out these tabs so you can see what's going on here. So they are, of course, playing octave chords, and now interpreting these octave chords from the vantage point of the implied chords right here. This octave chord is basically playing an E, which is the flat 3 of C sharp minor. When we move to the B implication, this is playing the 3rd of that, which is the D, the 3rd of B. And that'd be a D sharp, actually. And then when we move to this section right here, that we're once again playing a 3rd, and then we are moving to a 5. So following very closely, once again, we have the underlying chords, we have what the bass is doing, kind of supporting those underlying chords, and we have these lead lines up top supporting that. So let's go ahead and listen to the whole thing. Okay, so really, really just amazing sounding, like even in this, but like especially in the actual track. Let's go ahead and look at what's going on here. Now, again, this is kind of like a difficult part to analyze. I put what chords are being played here just in case anyone was interested, and you can obviously see the extensions based off of those here. If anyone wants to look more into that, I'll make it really clear for you guys to see what's happening here. Scrolling on down, you can also see what's happening in the bass and as in the higher lead line as well. Not going to talk about that too much because it's kind of a quick thing, but just wanted to show you all what's going on there. Moving on from there. Okay. So getting into the final part, it repeats the movement of C sharp to D sharp. We then have an E, which is the flat 3 of the C sharp minor scale. And then we have basically the E carries on, and then we'd move to what I would say would be the B again right here, depending on how you look at it. Again, with these sections, it gets kind of hard to interpret, so you just kind of got to do your best there. But this is what I'm seeing. Once again, I have notated what the extensions for the implied chords would be up over top. Again, we have a lot of ones right here, a lot of ones, a lot of 5s, a lot of flat 3s, staying very well within. Over top this D sharp, it'd be a D sharp diminished chord if we were going to look at it fully for the triad, the scale. We have some 1s, but we also have some flat 6s, some flat 7s, kind of moving outside of the chord tones for this E right here, which is actually playing a 4th extension of it. We have some 6s, some 3s. Again, just now right here, they're kind of stepping out more, and that gives it a very kind of unique and kind of almost like more sort of beautiful sound in some ways based on how you'd want to look at it. A little bit of a beautiful sound of things, just because I personally think extensions sound very beautiful. I'm sure people probably hear extensions differently, but that's how I would classify them. And it definitely gives you a more unique sound than sticking to the chord tones, that's for sure. And once again, right here, not going to talk about this section so much, just wanted to show you based off of the implied chords that I interpreted here, what extensions are being played. And here is the lead line over top of that too, and quickly getting on that, the sort of held notes. You can also see how the held notes, how the held notes relate to what's being played over top here. We have a flat 3, a 1 to the D sharp, a 6 to the E, a 1, and a 7 and a 1. So a lot of interesting stuff going on there. There's a lot of stuff to digest there. You know, in the interest of time, I'm not going to like go over every little thing, but hopefully you can see it right here if you're interested in what's going on. It's kind of a clear picture. I've zoomed into several different portions. So, you know, go ahead, pause the video at any point in time if you want to check out more succinctly what's happening here. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on. Now, the second verse and everything is pretty much just a repeat of what we've seen before. So I'm just going to go ahead and play through it, and I'll stop us when we get to the point of the next discussion topic. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and play it right now and just kind of comment on what we're hearing a little bit as we go. Okay, so we're going back to the first line. Again, we have lots of extensions implying different things. We have some fourths, some thirds, all to just imply power chords going on underneath in lots of interesting ways. Now, in this section, once again, we have some interesting extensions here being used to create interesting effects and interesting sounds. Some third harmonization here in a unique way. Okay. Alright, so we get to the palm muted parts. Lots and lots of chord tones being used here. Not entirely, but a lot all the same. Now the next lead is going to get added. Some chord tones and some non-chord tones. We have some flat 6s in here to give a lot of interestingness. Okay. Okay, so at this point, we're pretty much in a new section. Before we get there, there is a little bit of a change right here at this very last measure of the second verse. Just wanted to point it out. Not going to spend a ton of time on it. Wanted to show like sort of what's happening here with the implications based off of the bass, the lead lines, and the second rhythm guitar here. This section basically, it's just stacking full triads on top of each other. So when you're writing, you can have the bass play your root note or something close to your root note, and then stack on top of that a full triad by having one guitarist play the actual power chords as seen right here, and having the other ones play the root and the third of those. So basically, we have a C right here, for example. We have a C here as well. That's the third of C sharp, and that's the C sharps, actually, I should be saying. That's the fifth of C sharp. So what that does there is it just gives you the sound of a full triad, and it makes it a little more interesting and a little more thick and exciting. So just wanted to point that out really quick. And just as an oddity, this last half note or a quarter note right here is actually playing something entirely different than the bass too. So just a few things to point out. Went over that really quickly. Feel free to pause the video if you want to look at it more in depth. But let's go ahead and get to the freaking intense badass riff, man. Like the other ones weren't before. Okay, so gonna go ahead and get to the start of the sort of interlude riff or whatever you want to call it. Quick side note, this riff, man, I heard it on a trailer for this album coming out a long time ago on that TV show Fuse, and this was the part of it in the trailer, and like I heard this riff and I was like, man, this is awesome. And you know, all these years later, like finally talking about the song, man, fuck yeah. So I'm going to talk about the implications first, of course. So now I'm gonna actually hide up a few things that will just get in our way if they're left out. So we have the bass right here. Going to be viewing all this as C sharp on account of the bass, C sharp minor. So, you know, not to get too super in depth to the micro level of these things, I just wanted to go over things generally. I'm basically going to view all these implications as movements from the C sharp minor to the B to the A. And then we have sort of this deal right here, which may or may not be the best way to interpret it. Probably isn't, but nonetheless kind of spells out what I think is going on based off of what the bass is doing. So, and just to also kind of get into it past that, there is in addition some harmonies going on, a lot of different things actually. What we see here is essentially, so within each respective implied chord, we have all kinds of movements. We have some threes, some flat threes, some twos, some ones. Basically, we have everything. You know what I'm saying? All these different extensions up top here can be viewed. We then, on top of that, have harmonies going on as well to the tunes of sixes. Here we have a 4 right here, this C in comparison to this G right here, you know, just all kinds of different things to once again give the song a very, very interesting and unique feel. Like here, for example, this is actually implying a sort of inverted power chord. This G to the C sort of implies an inverted power chord, with the bass being the root that is C minor. And then, you know, you have all this other stuff. It's kind of hard to draw like a direct interpretation, but you can see that there is essentially a whole lot of fourth harmonies going on here in the C sharp minor implied measure. Moving on to the B, we can see if we have the same stuff going on. Yeah, once again, we have a lot of fourths. I mean, you know, here is a B, and there's your F sharp. So we have all kinds of things going on when it comes to fourths. We can see that right there would be an F sharp, and this right here would be a D sharp. So once again, that's actually a 6 right there. So you have all kinds of different, or no, that's the 1 actually. So yeah, you have all kinds of different things going on there in order to just make things sound very interesting, very unique. I mean, right here you have like a sort of contrary motion even, where you have an ascension going on between these notes here and a descension going on here. You can see that this D sharp here actually is a third above this B right here, while by way of comparison, there's a interval of a 6 separating this E over here and this note right here. So just basically, just to sum it up, all kinds of interesting, rather unique movements and harmonies going on. Again, that's assuming that this tab is perfectly accurate. It very well may not be. That being said, we've observed enough, and I feel like I can hear enough stuff in All That Remains to make it seem that this wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility of something that Ollie would write. He always talked about being very studious, like many guitarists, very studious to things, but also like wanting to experiment with things as well. And I feel like this is just a really, really badass, cool way, you know, 2008 or whenever it came out, standpoint, time frame anyways, a really cool way to experiment with lots of unique things, even within the mix of the more kind of radio-friendly song from the band. So just all that stuff is going on there. I'm going to speak very much more macro fashion now for the rest of this. We have then an A, we have a flat 6 implied based off of this being the 3, this being the 1, and this of course being the root right here. This is the bass, this is one guitar, this right here is the other guitar. And then we have some movements more kind of following in line with each other here. This looks like just straight up third note harmonies, or third harmonies I should say. Then we have kind of a confusing bit of stuff going on here, just based off of what the bass is doing. The bass is moving up, it's kind of ascending. So again, not going to talk about that super in depth. I will kind of leave it here for a second. If you want to pause the video and see what actually specifically is going on and what the extensions would be, you definitely can. And let's go ahead and move on to the next section. So intense, absolutely like at the highest level of intensity with that, man. Super cool. So then the implications change just a little bit. We're going to view things based off of the bass, once again, as moving from the C sharp minor to the D sharp would be a diminished chord to the E. So essentially ascending from the 1 to the 2 to the flat 3. And we're going to look at the harmonies that are happening here. And once again, it kind of looks like for this measure right here, for the C sharp implied measure, they're utilizing sort of implied inverted power chords. For the D sharp, they have the 1 right here, as well as just a third below that. So that's kind of interesting. This would essentially be functioning as a flat 6 from the root that the bass is playing. And then we can look at the E, and they are once again playing the actual E note like an octave higher than the bass. And then right here, they are playing another 6. So yeah, kind of another interesting thing right here. Once again, this would be a 6 in comparison to the bass that's being played right here. That's the E that's being played there. So yeah, all kinds of interesting stuff, all kinds of extensions being implied. I gotta say, imagine playing these chords, imagine playing these freaking chords on a single guitar and having to like freaking like feel out like where the root note is and where the root on top of that is and where like the fucking 6 extension for that be. It'd be crazy. You couldn't do that. So hence why they're doing it this way. We then have some more movements here. Not gonna talk about this in depth too much, this little transition section. I'll actually play it really quick. A little bit different than last time, or at least in the actual track it is, to the last transition. I think they're the same here. Not sure if this is totally accurate, but the idea being, once again, that they're stacking power chords on one guitar with a root and its third on the other guitar, and in most cases playing the lowest root note as low as possible on the bass here. So same sort of deal here. Sorry if I'm going a little bit fast. We still have a lot of stuff to get to in the solo. So let's just go ahead and play this. Okay, so solo time. Very intense, very powerful, very awesome. Going to go from macro level to micro level with this stuff. So very first thing, not even going to look at the solo, honestly. I want to just at the moment discuss what the rhythm and bass guitars are doing on their own. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at here is essentially this. Now, the first measure of the solo will start on a C sharp minor implication, based off of, once again, the B. Now, I actually viewed all of these, for each measure, I interpreted one chord. Now, that's not necessarily optimal because, as you can see on the guitar and on the bass, there are quick movements in the form of quarter notes going on within each measure along with the half notes shown here. So there are other ways to do this, of course. I really kind of took a macro approach to this because like this is like the solo. Like I'm looking at the rhythm in the solo and there's a solo to get to. So I took a very macro level approach to all of this. So let's go ahead and just look at this. C sharp minor to B, and again that's the flat 7. Then quickly, right after that, moving to the C sharp minor again, to the B, to the flat 7, to the E, which is the flat 3, kind of major sounds, to an F sharp minor, which is the 4. So that's what's happening right there. We're going to go ahead and start looking at the solo based off of that then. Okay. So now, the very first part. Once again, sticking closely within C sharp minor, the very, very first measure of the solo. Sticking very closely to the C sharp minor chord, we have a 7, a flat 3, a 5, and then we have an open 6. There are, of course, some other notes that are a little bit open to interpretation. This section right here, this measure moving on to the B, to the flat 7, a little more like open for interpretation, actually not an overabundance of melodic tones in here, a lot of sort of non-chord tones if you want to look at it that way. So just giving a little bit of intensity, pulling things outside of the standard chord can do that. We then move back to the C sharp minor, to the B, to the E, to the F minor, F sharp minor. And, you know, we have a little bit of use from the chord tones. We have some C sharps right here. We go ahead and use a B right here for this downbeat. And then we have an E here as well. So we have a lot of things going on in order to try to keep it within the chord tones, to keep the song unified and to keep it put together. So yeah. Then also an interesting thing, very, very softly, but I feel you can barely hear it. I think during this section, as it repeats, go ahead and get to it. Right here. So you can hear it very, very clearly in the tab. It's in the song, it's a lot harder to hear, but I feel there is in fact like a very almost quiet and subdued harmony that goes on behind it. As for these extensions, there's a lot, or for these harmony notes, there's a lot of different things going on here. Some of them are just straight thirds like we've seen before, and sometimes they're not. Like right here, you can see that we actually have a G played underneath an E. So, you know, again, not sure if this tab is totally accurate, but I do hear something going on back there, and based on what we've already seen and based on just how the song sounds itself, wouldn't surprise me too much if something like that was going on here. So not going to spend too much more time talking about this section. Like I said, we're kind of delving into the solo, but even within this, we can only get so micro level. So we're going to move on to the next part. Okay, so looking at the sort of triplet shred part, let's go ahead and get to that. So we have what I believe to be the exact same chords as last time. We have a C sharp minor, a B, C sharp minor within the same measure to a B again, then to an E, which is the flat 3, and that should be a flat 3 actually, to the F sharp minor. So from there, we're going to go ahead and look at the solo itself, and I'm interpreting those implications based off the rhythm and the guitar and the bass basically doing the exact same thing as the last few measures. So yeah, just have a few notes here to go over and everything. You can see I didn't like list every single extension, of course, but we do have a lot of ones, a lot of fives, a lot of chord tones here especially. We have the use of some chord tones. We have the 5 starting out right here on the first downbeat. We have the use of the 1s here and there. We also have some stuff outside of the chord tones and some stuff that really would need to be kind of just open to interpretation, just pulling things out from wherever, then returning back to the C minor or C sharp minor implication. We have a little bit of a different line, but once again, sticking very, very closely. You can see the 1, you can see the 5, sticking very, very closely to the chord tones themselves, with a little bit of sort of non-chord tones happening as we move to the B implication right there. So yeah, good deal right there. And I think I said before that should be a flat 3. That is in fact actually a flat 7. So if I said that, I misspoke. But let's go ahead and move. This E right here should be the flat 3. So we're going here once again, and again, not getting into every single little like possible thing. But within this line, once again, we have some 3s, we have some 1s, still sticking closely to things. We have the 5, and we have even a 1 right here, ending on the same note as the chord is being applied, as seen by the bass, which is right here, that being an F sharp. So, yeah, gonna go ahead and just play this whole thing again real quick. I gotta say, one thing in a very kind of general sense, and just like the idea of like where to move to in the song, I really, really like how Ollie does this sort of 3-string sweeping action before transitioning in the last measure to this 2-string sort of pull-off action he has right here. You know, it's really one thing that I feel can really just make all the difference in the song is just even changing up one little measure of a song can make a part go from feeling somewhat repetitions to just completely fresh and new. And that's not to say that there should be a different pattern for like every single measure. I think that could be a little bit too much, but this right here, changing the very last measure, I think is a perfect implementation of diversity to a solo like this in order to keep it within itself, but also moving forward. So very, very good stuff there. I'm going to go ahead and play the next part. It's a repeat, so I'm not really going to talk about anything, but I am going to play it so we can get to the next part after. So yeah, then we go into the sort of transition part to the very, very melodic part. This is the part that's in the music video. If you've only like listened for some reason to the version of the song that's in the music video, you don't hear everything in the solo that I just talked about. It actually starts up right here. So yeah, it's a very good part. It's a very melodic part. It's the same. The other part is cut off from the music video, but nonetheless, here we are. So just, again, gonna be like micro level with a lot of this and get like into the weeds with what we need to, but not every little bit of it. Looking at the bass line right here, although I don't necessarily hear this in the song, what this tab shows is just C minor chords and notes on the bass being played. I think that maybe on this chord right here, They might be having Mike or someone up jump up an octave and play a chord an octave higher than this just to make it sound like a little bit like it's rising. Not positive one way or the other, but I do feel like I hear a little bit of movement. What we're here for more so is the solo, of course. So looking at this little kind of really cool like pull off transition part right here, based off of the implied C sharp minor chord, we have lots of notes that stick closely to it. The B3 right here, the flat 3, and the 1 are notated because they are chord tones themselves. So anything that's not notated here are not chord tones. But we do have a lot of chord tones going on here nonetheless. On the downbeat specifically, on the downbeat right there, on the 2, we have the 1 right here being played from C sharp minor, and on the 4 downbeat, we have the flat 3 being played. On top of that, pretty cleanly across the board, I believe we just have a lot of third note harmonies going on as well. So once again, very within itself, yet expanding out as much as it can to keep things sounding interesting and unique. So let's go ahead and get on to the sort of main part of the solo. Obviously, this tab doesn't sound perfect, just a disclaimer. All right, so notated some of this stuff right here. Let's go ahead and just take it bit by bit. The solo, starting from here. So I'm actually just going to kind of, I've taken the implications and put down what I thought they were. I'm going to actually just kind of go through whatever I can see interesting right now and try to make sense of it. It's going to be a little bit difficult with some of the bends and stuff they have notated here, but we'll go ahead and give it a shot. Now, this right here seems to be bending to a C sharp minor, which makes a lot of sense. We then move to a flat 7. Basically, this is the exact same riff as the chorus, as part of the chorus. So we then move to a B, which is a flat 7. And within that, we can see right off the bat, we have some Bs right here. So staying well within itself, we have another B here, several chord tones as well. Staying well within itself, staying within the confines of the chord that is being implied. So moving on from there. A lot of these notes kind of very slow, very deliberate and everything. So here we have a flat 6, which is an A. And from there, we actually can see that it's playing a 4th, so a 4th is being held in relation to the implied A before jumping up to that A right there, or actually the 3rd of that A, I'm sorry. 3rd of the A being right here, that being the C sharp. This part being kind of cool right here, just going kind of rapid fire through what we can here. We then see that we're back on the C sharp minor based on what the bass is doing once again. Playing actually a note kind of outside of it, moving around, not quite getting to the C sharp itself until jumping to right here through a slur. Moving up and ascending over a implied B chord, which is the flat 7. Let's see what happens here. So just kind of ascending, utilizing some of the chord tones like the 5 of the B chord right here, and jumping up to an actual B here, and just moving up through until we hit an A, which actually, based on this tab, is harmonized. Harmonized up to the A with a little bit of bendings going on, moving up through, hitting the 3rd of an A right here, doing some other kind of bending stuff, before getting into a shred that actually starts on the C sharp itself, ascending through, jumping up with the downbeat of the next measure, which has a B implied chord being played right here on the 2nd of that B implied power chord, moving all the way up to here. A very cool and quick kind of pull-off movement going on right there with the E implication. This being a C right here, finally jumping up and hitting an E over in this section, and kind of just as much as possible hitting the 3rd right there of the E and doing some other things to try to reach up and hit chord tones within that E without ever really focusing around it. Like, I would say that probably he found a lick that sounded more or less good within the confines of this E chord, of this flat 3, that utilized quite a few notes from that power chord, but more or less just found a cool riff and sort of superimposed that on top of it. And that trill right there, let's see, that trill right there is not using any E's. Huh, okay. So then we have this really awesome harmonized line right here, and I'm going to go ahead and hide this section. We have this really awesome harmonized line, which is strictly using, it looks like it's strictly using third note harmonies all the way through, I believe. Yeah, it looks like it. Utilizing third note harmonies. With the sort of these two pedal tones, if we're going to call these pedal tones, being the 5 of C sharp, these two being the 3, the flat 3 of C sharp, and these two being the 3, these two being the 1. So this, within this measure, kind of eventually pulling back down in a harmonized fashion to the C sharp minor chord. Looking at the D section, these pedal tones being the 3 of D, these being the 1, the D themselves, these ones being the D, and these ones being a third below D minor, D sharp minor, and then finally moving to E. Looking at here and seeing that we have 1s on the E, we have E notes right here within the E implied chord tone. And then moving around a little bit, jumping down to the D. And then looking here, seeing that we're a third below the E, a fourth below the E, 1 below the, or a 2 below the E, all based off of that. And the non-pedal tones kind of jumping around all over the place to give some interesting movement. And finally, a little bit of a sweep, which essentially utilizes a interesting mix of what I would call in this section to be a straight up 7th chord on top of another 7th chord. So yeah, very, very good stuff in this section, following very closely, best I can tell, except for the last 2 notes, which actually, once again, utilize a 4th, this being the 4 and this being the 1. And this section, this G right here, being a 4th to this, or actually rather a 6 to this note right here. So yeah, a lot of stuff, just kind of rapid fired through it the best I could and everything. Sorry if any of that was confusing. Some of it probably was. A lot of stuff going on here, a lot of stuff to unpack here. This solo could actually be a whole video in and of itself. Just kind of wanted to give you the best I could with what I had and everything. Hopefully some of that made sense, or most of that made sense, and you're able to glean something from it. But as you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on here, and that's the important thing of that, is that this is kind of, it's crazy because this is kind of the level of thinking that it takes to create songs that sound like this, you know? Like, I'd hear like prog type songs, like, you know, Dream Theater type stuff and other things, and be like, oh, you know, wow, these songs are so complicated and everything. And it makes me start feeling that, you know what, I guess the music I like is, you know, a little bit simple maybe, because, you know, it's not like super proggy or whatever. But when you look at this, even though it's following a structure of, you know, obviously the tempo doesn't change and it stays within the entire key itself, within those confines, there still is so much happening that to say it's like math rock, I mean, I don't think that'd be terribly accurate, but to say that it's terribly simple to understand, or that it's kind of simple metal, not the case at all. It's very, very interesting. It's very, very complex to understand, and it takes a lot of time to be able to kind of think through it and everything. There was probably, you know, 100 things I could have said right there that I didn't, just because there's so many different ways to look at things. So that was just kind of the quick and dirty discussion of the solo. I might actually end up making a whole video where I just talk about the solo in and of itself and really, really dive into it, because this is definitely one where it's worth it. But for right now, that is more or less the conclusion of the solo. I'm just going to play the song all the way through to the next point I have marked to discuss. Let's go ahead and get to the next section. We go back to the verse. Again, there's all kinds of interesting like harmonies and extensions being applied here to keep it unique, and inversions too. We now get to the percussive part. Again, utilizing atypical, not just strictly power chords to keep things unique. Then everything cuts except for the lead guitar. Okay, so just going to talk about that. Wanted to talk a little bit about why that is an effective movement and an effective transition right there. Once again, going back to the very, very first part of the song where it was nothing but a snare drum and a single guitar, the ebb and flow, the movement from intensity, away from intensity, and back to intensity is one of the driving factors that makes music like this so interesting sounding and so professional sounding, you know? In order to incorporate something like that is a really, really good idea. And to do that, what you have to do basically is cut everything out. And there's a lot of stuff on 3D positioning. I'm not any kind of like expert at it at all, but a few things you could do to that is to add a little bit of reverb, a little bit of delay, or what I think probably more likely happened here was to cut just a little bit of the highs frequencies away, of the sort of presence type frequencies away, in order to make it sound a little bit further back and a little more reduced. So you have everything in your face, then cut back to being a little bit more restrained and pulled off of you. So good stuff right there. Let's go ahead and get to the next part. So at this part, and it's obviously not in the tab because it's something related to the vocals, at this part, Phil's voice comes in. And one thing I wanted to point out, just the moment before his voice comes in, you can hear something that sounds like a reversed syllable or something like that, just a reversed breath even, that maybe Phil or someone else made like during the process of recording, just to give you a little bit of a pull into when his voice re-enters. You know, it's those little touches that make all the difference to a song being powerful and legit and complete sounding versus like a little bit less so and everything. And those are all things that I aim to try to remember when I make my own music, let me assure you. And then his voice itself, and obviously you don't hear it here, but his voice itself also kind of has like a little bit of a, you know, telephone EQ effect, you might call it. Basically just a lot of the highs, or the lows rather, are cut to make his voice sound a lot less sort of in your face. You know, he sounds somewhat kind of like he's close to you because it's the highs remaining, but it's like it's coming through a telephone or something like that. So, which is a really nice effect in comparison to what is probably being cut on the guitar frequencies. Then the guitars fade in, and you get hit full force right back into it. And after everything is being pulled off of you and pulled away, the return to that kind of full force attack that the guitars and the drums and everything gives you returning is really, really nice. So at this point, the actual music theory of the song, best I can hear and I can tell, is nearly exactly the same, based off of this tab anyways, as what we've discussed before. So I actually want to discuss this last chord, a little bit of the sort of production decisions made in the song and how that directly relates and directly correlates to the arrangement of things. So I'm going to go ahead and play this and sort of comment like as we go through, and I'll back up as well. So at this point, the guitars, everything is doing, it sounds exactly the same as it has prior, best I can tell, in the actual track themselves, in the fully produced track. Okay, so I'm gonna be playing the Guitar Pro tab for like context and everything, but overall, obviously, you're not gonna be able to hear this because it's a tab. This part of what I'm gonna be discussing starts at 3:52 in the song. If I notated that correctly, 3:52. I'll be able to tell what I'm talking about if you want to look at there. I can't play it because it's fucking YouTube. I mean, I don't want to get fucked by the system. So it starts on 3:52. Now, the first thing I hear, and this is kind of interesting, it might be hard to hear if you're on headphones or if you're on laptop speakers, but if you have like a left and right speaker, I feel that the palm muted part, opposed to being on the sides like it was before, actually ends up being directed specifically into the center. So like as I'm sitting back and I'm listening to this song, I feel like the palm muted parts prior were coming at me like this, like from side to side, whereas now what's happening in the last part is that they're coming dead on me at the center. Like they were literally panned to the center for this part. I feel like there also might be a little more delay or like maybe reverb on them, probably delay, just to give them a little bit of a different quality too. And what that does, even if you're listening to it like on a mono device, what that does is gives you just that little tiny extra bit of variation to sort of key into your brain that this is the final part. You're hearing something new, even though you might not be able to tell that it's new, for the final part. And the cool thing, or I don't know if it's cool, but the interesting thing is that it's the exact same riff as before. It's just moved around, and it has a little bit of a, I feel like it has a little bit of a different processing on it. So really cool move right there to keep things unique and interesting. And then moving on from there, right here you can hear it quite clearly. I only, like, this only occurred to me like literally like 2 weeks ago. I was listening to the song on headphones and I heard some backing vocals. Now I've heard, like, in this very last part, I've barely noticed the backing vocals in the past, but I heard for the first time the backing vocals and thought that, you know what? I'm not sure that that's Phil saying those vocals. I think that might actually be Jeannie saying, she was their former bassist when this album came out. I think that might actually be Jeannie, female vocalist, which is cool, or a bassist doing the vocals, which adds a, if that is in fact true, that adds a really cool, unique element to it, having female vocals come there all of a sudden. Now Phil has some fairly good range, so if that could very well be his vocals just kind of going higher up. But listening to them, they kind of sound like a female vocalist, and that's really awesome. I never heard that till just recently. I never put that together in my brain till just recently. And what you hear on this last chorus is just as it plays from the last section, you hear almost like a humming, an ah coming through. Just did a terrible job there. But you hear it kind of rising and falling at the same time in line with the rhythm. And I feel like the notes that are hitting are the same notes as the rhythm guitar is hitting. And what you're going on with that, and as you're hearing that, you're also hearing, I feel, the sort of uniquely produced guitar that comes at that point, the palm muted guitar that's coming down the center instead of on the sides. I feel that as I hear her vocals, or I'm assuming it's her, maybe it's Phil's, but I'm going to just say hers for the purposes of this. As I hear her vocals coming up, I feel like I also hear that center palm muted guitar get down, almost like it's being automated to lower as her vocals come up, or maybe even like that it was side chained to her vocals. So as her vocals come up, they progressively turn the guitar down. Either one, it creates just a feeling that what you're listening to is so completely different without giving you anything demonstrable to let you know that it's different. It's not like Ollie's ripping out with a crazy solo here. I mean, that'd be cool, but it's so subtle. I mean, it went like 10 years pretty much without me ever really noticing it. Like, I noticed the background vocals before, but recently I've only like, hey, I think that's probably Jeannie's. And literally looking at the song right now and listening to the actual song as I sort of prepared for this video, I only now heard that palm muted guitar pushed into the center. Like, just right now, never before, just now. So to hear all that stuff now, it's so cool, man. It's like finding like an Easter egg in a movie or something like that. It's pretty tight. So I just wanted to talk about that some here. I'm going to play this all the way to the end through and see if there's anything else that's worth talking about. Right, yeah, and then finally ending it out, the same sort of trick we talked about before, making it so that you are basically stacking recorded guitar parts on top of each other, one part playing thirds and the other part playing fifths, in order to just give a full and complete picture of what the triad sounds like. So yeah, and that's the end of the song, man. That's it. Holy shit, man, that was a lot of stuff. I hope that made sense to you guys. There's a lot of stuff going on here that take me a ton of time to dig into. I'm seriously considering maybe doing a video that strictly just tears down the solo to the most like micro level possible and really seeing what's going in there, because after going over it now, I feel there could be a lot of good material in there to really just provide a super good like how to make an interesting yet very diatonic solo. So might do that. We'll see how that goes. If you guys appreciated and enjoyed this long ass fucking video, I would very much thank you if you could check out a new song that I recently put out to Spotify. It's called Telestial Freight. To find it, you can type in Spike Signal onto Spotify like you see it here on YouTube. It's also on any other streaming platform, so if you like Apple Music or whatever, you can find it there as well. And if you so desire, please do all that shit the YouTube algorithm likes as well. But you don't have to do any of that, man. I'm going to be right here doing this thing one way or the other. So just do your thing. It's all cool. If you liked this video, man, and you want to see more, keep it right here at the Spike Signal to see more. Thank you.